Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to take a fascinating, completely impartial look at some incredibly charged claims recently dropped by the Two Worlds Collide podcast. Today, we're deconstructing a very specific argument all about the Australian media landscape, the Anthony Albanese Labor government, and, well, a whole lot of money. Now, whether you lean left, right, or center, you got to admit the allegations being thrown around here are massive. We're going to break down exactly what this podcast is claiming, step by step, using the exact numbers and theories they presented to their audience. So the core premise of the podcaster's argument really hinges on one major question. Is the government secretly buying the news? The host sets the stage with a pretty vivid contrast. They claim that while the Australian public was totally distracted by a viral television moment, that guy correcting his working dog on national TV, the government was busy behind the scenes. According to the source, right under the cover of this national distraction, the government secretly kicked off a massive funding program for the press. It's a classic misdirection theory, right? And it really sets the foundation for the explosive claims that come next.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 1, the core funding claim.
You see, the podcaster doesn't just stick to vague accusations here. They bring out some rapid-fire numerical claims to really illustrate the sheer scale of this alleged government intervention. The first major number they throw out, 2,000. The host explicitly claims that exactly 2,000 Australian journalists are now being secretly backed and funded by the government. The irony, as the podcaster points out, is that these are the exact same journalists whose job it is to hold that government to account. The core accusation here is that the watchdog is essentially being fed by the hand it's supposed to bite. And we're not just talking about an isolated operation in one or two major cities either. According to the source, this government funding has been spread incredibly wide, reaching exactly 184 different newsrooms across the country. By highlighting this specific number, the host is really trying to convey the pervasive nature of this alleged funding. They want the listener to feel like this isn't just happening in some obscure publications, but practically everywhere you look. To put a literal price tag on all of this, the podcast provides a financial estimate, claiming that somewhere between $60 and $70 million of government money is being funneled into this media initiative. When you take these three numbers together, 2,000 journalists, 184 newsrooms, and $60 to $70 million, the source is constructing a picture of a massive, heavily financed, state-sponsored media apparatus operating right under the public's nose. Which brings us to Section 2, Media Winners and Losers.
And this brilliantly illustrates where the narrative shifts from just the sheer volume of money to how that money is allegedly being weaponized. The podcaster's argument is that this massive pile of cash was absolutely not distributed equally or fairly across the board. Instead, they claim it was deliberately handed out along very strict partisan lines. The source states that mainstream and left-leaning organizations like Channel 9, Channel 7, Crikey, and The Conversation all eagerly took the cash. Meanwhile, organizations on the right, like Sky News, along with independent journalists and independent podcasters, didn't just miss out. They supposedly weren't even allowed to apply. The overarching claim here is that the government is exclusively subsidizing friendly voices while completely icing out its critics.
Next up is Section 3, the transparency issue. So the crucial point is, for the host of the Two Worlds Collide podcast, the partisan divide is bad enough. But their major grievance actually centers on journalistic ethics. It's about what the public doesn't know when they open a newspaper or turn on the evening broadcast. The podcaster expresses intense frustration that these supposedly funded journalists aren't required to disclose where their paychecks are coming from. According to the source, there are absolutely no mandatory disclaimers. A journalist can write a story or deliver the news without ever having to say, "Hey, this was brought to you by the Anthony Albanese government." For the host, this hidden backing completely destroys the integrity of the news, because the audience is entirely unaware of the financial strings attached. Let's jump into Section 4, the 2028 election theory. Now, the podcaster ties all of these claims together into this grand political theory regarding the next election. Think about it. Why spend $60 to $70 million? Why do it in secret? And why only fund specific outlets? Well, starting in the present day, this alleged funding is active. But looking ahead, this supposedly secret program is scheduled to end exactly in May 2028. And what does the podcaster guarantee will happen then? A federal election. They argue that this timeline is absolutely no coincidence and that the funding is strategically designed to perfectly overlap with the government's re-election campaign. Based on that very specific timeline, the host arrives at a highly aggressive conclusion. They accuse the Labor government of deliberately shoring up these 2,000 journalists to act as loyal soldiers. In fact, the exact phrasing the podcaster uses is that the Prime Minister has essentially created 2,000 attack dogs. According to the source, these funded journalists will do whatever the government says and ruthlessly go after anyone or anything that threatens the administration in the lead up to the 2028 election. Finally, we reach Section 5, the ultimate critique.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that having laid out all the numbers and the timeline, the podcaster delivers their ultimate critique, and this really captures the absolute peak of their rhetoric. The exact quote is, "That's not journalism, that's a state-funded media organization. Welcome to communism." Now, it is absolutely vital to note here that we are looking at the source's ideological viewpoint, not an established objective fact. By using terms like state-funded media and communism, the podcaster is using incredibly strong, inflammatory language to express their total distrust of the current system. They are positioning this funding not just as a policy disagreement, but as a fundamental threat to democratic freedom itself.
The podcaster actually ends their segment with a very simple question to their audience. What's your thoughts? And as we wrap up this explainer, we want to pose that exact same challenge to you, but perhaps on an even broader scale. Regardless of whether you accept the podcast's claims or completely reject them, analyzing this perspective really raises some fundamental questions. How should government media funding be handled? Where exactly is the line between supporting journalism and compromising its independence? And how crucial is absolute transparency when public money is involved in our newsrooms? That is the real takeaway from this deconstruction. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.